Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of The Creative Insider, a podcast that will help you succeed in every creative field.
But the whole world stops just like that.
Hello and welcome, this is me, your host Georgi Leshtarsky, and in the today episode we'll be discussing how to present your work. Being able to present your work is crucial. In my opinion, it is critical in every creative industry. I have seen so many talented people, especially creatives in the design field, that were able to make awesome works, but their presentation just sucked. So let's discuss some points that could help you in boosting your presentation abilities. First of all, it is very important not to be boring during your presentation, or even worse, sound like you're frustrated. Some people, when I was at the University of Architecture, during their project's presentation, sounded like they were doing us a favor, the favor to present their works. Or some others were just frustrated. They sounded like someone was about to kill them, like that presentation was the final moment of their life. Well, just don't be like that. In the end of the day, it is your work, it is the fruit of your passion, it's what you love doing. If you're not excited about it, who should be? Be passionate about what you say. Tell the story of your project with excitement, with love, not frustration. And exactly this is the key. Make your presentation a story. Some creatives think that a presentation needs to be a factual and technical. Something very cold and detached where you show your expertise. Well, your presentation is not just a list of facts and numbers, it is a story. Storytelling is very important. A good story is what generates a connection between who is listening and your work, to make your audience curious about what you have created, to awake emotions in the listeners, and if you will be good enough, even make them fall in love with your work. But how does a successful story look like? In every good story, we know there is always a protagonist that finds an obstacle in his way. To overcome the obstacles, he needs to grow, to improve. And when the protagonist figures out how to overcome that obstacles, he succeeds in his endeavor and comes to a happy end. So let's see who are the characters in your presentation and how does it work. Who is the protagonist of your story? Well, the protagonist of your story is you, because you are the creative. You are the one that brings your works to life. And what is the obstacle in your story? The obstacle in your story is the assignment. Whether it comes from your professor or your client, that is the obstacle. And what is the resolution of the story? What is the happy end? The happy end is your creation, your final product. But just telling a story, of course, is not enough. It needs to be a good story. And the story to be good, it needs a good base, which is your work. So your product needs to be good. You can have a good product and make a bad presentation, but you definitely cannot have a bad product and make a good presentation. You can try to present in a good way a bad project, but that would be like being a cheap seller that tries a series of buzzwords to trick people into buying his products, and this is not what genuine creatives do. And let's be honest, people can sense when they're lied to. So to make a good presentation, a good practice is to conceive your work in the most aware possible way. By that I mean considering what are your goals, what are the obstacles towards that goals, and how you overcome them to arrive to your final product. For example, you could keep all this information on record in a journal, and when you're about to make your presentation, go back to that journal and see what was the process and what were your difficulties and how you overcome them. In this way, Your presentation and your work will be those two symbiotic elements that complete each other. But how can you make a really deep connection to the audience to create in your listeners that positive gut sensation? That sensation that you experience when you start using some new product and you love it, but you cannot really explain why. It is just that emotional feeling. Well, I discovered more about this phenomena through the book Start With Why from Simon Sinek, which is also a very famous TED Talk, the title of his TED Talk, which is one of the most listened of all time, I think. He explains this simple principle, this simple path he calls the golden circle. So imagine 3 concentric circles, where in the central one there is the word why, in the middle one there is the word how, and in the most external one there is the word what. In this talk, Simon Sinek says that most companies communicate from the outside circle towards the central circle. But all inspiring companies and personalities start with a core principle, with their why, and from there they transition to the external circles, how, and in the end, what. He also explains that there is a correlation between those 3 major components of our presentations and our brain. For example, the what corresponds to our neocortex, which is the newest part of our brain and which is responsible for our rational thoughts, or, for example, for our rational decision making. And the how and the why, meanwhile, corresponds to the limbic brains, which is the oldest one, which is the more central one. And that part of the brain is what rules our feelings and our human behavior and our non-rational decision making, our gut. The goal of the presentation is to be exactly that good, that connect to the core of the brain of your listeners, so they get that positive feeling about your work. Simon Sinek in his talk and in his book makes some examples, like, for example, the company Apple, or figures like Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers. If you want to listen the exact presentation, Google him and you will find this video, or you can buy his book. But from what I've learned, I can tell you as a personal advice, when you make a presentation, just look into yourself, think about what are you so passionate about, what you do, how you did it, create your core value and follow it in your project, and then try to externate it during your presentation. And trust me, that will level up a lot the quality of your storytelling. But of course, as I said, it's not only about what you say, but also how you say it. So if you have the first points I mentioned totally in check, those are not enough, because you also need to know how to tell them in public, how to tell them in front of other people. So before I mentioned TED Talks, well, if you don't know about those, go and check some. Those are very well prepared presentations of ideas that are worth to be spread. So all the speakers that take part in the TED Talks are prepared for a longer time from a large group of TED certified coaches. So recently I have read the book Talk Like TED of the author Carmine Gallo, and he analyzes the core aspects of the presentations of the different TED Talks and analyze why they are so successful. So a good strategy is to practice and rehearse a lot. You can rehearse in front of a person you know, or you can even rehearse in front of a small group of people. And so you can get used to the sensation of presenting your work and your project in front of other people. So those people can get you feedback, and you can adapt your presentation accordingly to that feedback. For example, what Carmine Gallo mentions in his book are 3 very important points to keep in mind while you're speaking, which are volume, pitch, and pace. The first, the volume, it's about the loudness or the softness of your voice. So to make it simple, do not scream during your presentation, but also do not whisper, talk that people can hear you. Then there are the pitches, which are the high and the low inflections in your voice while talking. So do not be monotone while talking, because that could be incredibly boring and of course will destroy the quality of your storytelling. But try to use the pitches to create the emotions where they're needed. So for example, talk louder and with more emotion when there is something positive, and talk maybe a little lower when you're explaining some problematic part of the project. I mean, you can listen to speeches online and check how the different speakers do it. Of course, it's a matter of practice. And then the last part is the pace. The pace is the speed with which you talk. For example, in my university, we used to have time limit to present your project. So often students would speak extremely fast just to say more about what they have done to create their project, and you couldn't understand nothing. So to be clear again, it's not about how much you say, but what and how you say it. So you can be faster in some points that are not so important, and slower in other to make a mark in this point, and so it's more clear for the listeners and you give a sort of importance to that point. And again, this is all of those points are a matter of practice. So just try to practice more and you will improve. What is written in the book of Carmine Gallo, in general, that a good pace is around 190 words per minute. So it's, as I said, a very excited and positive pace of speech. But again, this can be changed based on the content of your presentation. So these were my tips about your presentation skills. I hope you found them helpful. It is what I know and it's what works for me. But of course, I'm always curious to learn back from you. So you can feel free to tell me what are your methods and strategies to nail a good presentation. And you can do that on the usual social media channels, which are Instagram. Instagram is at TCI Podcast. The Facebook page of the podcast, which is the Creative Insider. And last but not least, the LinkedIn page, the Creative Insider. As I said, I would be super happy to hear from you, and I'm very curious to see what are your strategies. And it will be very awesome if you could support the show by sharing the episodes on your social media, or just talk about it with your family and friends, colleagues, or whoever would be interested in listening. So thank you very much again for tuning in. I hope you'll join me next Monday when we will be talking about how to monetize your creativity. And that's it for now. Until next week. Bye.
The whole world stops just like that.